Hello there. I'm going to talk to you today about the beauty of a complex future. When I talk about beauty, I use the definition of a combination of qualities that pleases. If you think about an orchestra playing a beautiful piece of music or a piece of artwork, there are often various factors that make something beautiful. I'm also going to talk about this idea of complexity. Complexity is the foundation underpinning my thesis, and I've been really diving into this sense of what makes something complex. What can we learn from complexity science? Complexity is all around us, and this picture illustrates the fact that an ant colony is called a complex adaptive system. The ants self-organize, they interact, and without the input from the queen, they actually build this colony. So complexity has a lot to say about where we are, particularly in history at the moment. But before I get started, I'm going to pose 3 questions. I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes, and then we might have about 20 minutes to have a chat about a few things. And so I've posed my talk around these 3 questions, and this gives us a sense of a structure that we can talk about later, things that might be relevant to you. So these 3 questions are: what is something unexpected you are taking forward from 2020? What are some of the taken for granted assumptions about school that are ripe for change? And when have you experienced the benefits of bottom-up change? So in 10 minutes, my life's work on complexity theory. Let's go. I'm going to start with talking to you about what complexity isn't. There are 3 images here that will help to explain that. First of all, complexity isn't like following a recipe. If you think about when we cook, if we have the recipe to follow, the ingredients, the equipment we need, and then a degree of expertise, we can work in a linear process from A to B to create the recipe that we want. Complexity isn't like repairing a watch. My father was a watchmaker, and repairing watches is a mechanical process. I used to watch him as a child sit at his workbench with those tiny tools and all those tiny little components of the watch. He was able to take it apart, fix, repair, replace, and put it back together again. A watch is the sum of its parts, but people aren't, and people are complex. The third thing complexity isn't, it isn't like playing pin the tail on the donkey. I don't know if you played that as a child, but you have a pin with a tail and you have a photograph or a picture of a donkey over here. And the party game is to get that pin onto the rump of the donkey. But there's a catch. You've got a blindfold on, you've been spun around. Your senses are disoriented. All you can hope for is feel your way in the dark and hope for the best. And I've been in that situation. Perhaps you have too. It's not a nice way to be. So complexity is not simple like following a recipe. It's not mechanical like fixing a watch, and it's not chaotic like playing pin the tail on the donkey. So what is it? Well, complexity is a little bit like raising a child. My husband and I have 2 adult sons, and they've turned out as pretty nice humans. And I think that's the goal we have as parents, to do all we can to create these well-rounded humans at the end. But there's no step-by-step guide to raising a child. When we start out, we have this vague idea of where we would like to end up. We have some experience and we have some skills and we're willing to learn. There's usually people in our world who have expertise and may have been down this road before us. And it often feels like 1 step forward, 2 steps back, doesn't it? But ultimately we know where we want to head, but there's no real certainty of the path. Imagine if we did have a manual. When we gave birth, they gave us a manual and everything was in there. So if your child didn't want to eat vegetables, you just followed what was on page 75, job done. But the reality is that's not possible, because no child is the same. And even if they're in the same household, each child is quite unique. So let's get on to our questions now. What is something unexpected you are taking forward from 2020? Change is such an important part of our life. We have so many metaphors of change. We can turn over a new leaf. We can get the ball rolling. We can blow away the cobwebs. Change is everywhere. And Greek philosopher Heraclitus once said, change is the only constant. But when we add a layer of complexity, it brings change into a whole new realm. I call it the realm of the unknown, unprecedented, and unexpected. And in 2020, it feels like we're at this crossroad, doesn't it? It's like we've had a crash course that we didn't sign up for on complexity. We've been immersed in it. We've all traveled down a road that's been the unroad. But what's the temptation as we move forward? Are we tempted to go back to just the familiar and the safe? Or are we prepared to learn from that unknown road and embrace the change that is before us? While 2020 has intensified change for us, change is a constant that's been in life. But then McKinsey, the business consultants, tell us that 70% of change initiatives fail. They fail to achieve the goal that they set out. So why would we bother implementing change strategy? What if you went to all the effort, like 70% that they surveyed, and it was for nothing? McKinsey went on to say that the most likely reason for this 70% failure rate was employee resistance. So I began to wonder, what makes something the 30%? What creates successful and sustainable change initiatives? Rather than employee resistance, what if the tipping point for the 30% was employee engagement? What if the employees were involved in the change? They were part of the change. And what does this take from leadership? Well, it takes leaders who can put aside being the cleverest in the room to actually being the courageous. Top-down leadership, it's clever. You have to come up with all the ideas. But when you're courageous, leaders are willing to hand over the reins to the people to be agents of their own change. This is evident that in the mindset that we bring to leading our people, that we can look at them and understand and appreciate that each of them have something to offer to bring change to the culture. So what are some of the taken for granted assumptions about school that are today that are ripe for change? Well, one of the first things we need to do when we are looking at change from a complexity perspective is to challenge our taken for granted assumptions. Now, history has been, we've been the product of change and disruptions all throughout history. But can you imagine that time when somebody said, see this piece of paper, it's worth the same as this bag of gold. Can you imagine that piece of paper for a bag of gold? Or if you lick this tiny little picture of the Queen and put it on the envelope, put it in that box, your letter will reach its destination. Notes for currency and postage stamps were once the big disruptors of their time. And progress is peppered with crazy ideas that today we take for granted as a normal part of life. It took a leap of faith for people to trust these disruptions, and it's no different today. The first thing we need to do is to embrace complexity, is to challenge our taken for granted assumptions. The second thing we need to do is allow our people to be agents of their own change. This is a critical factor in the shift from clever leadership to courageous leadership. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room anymore. So when have you experienced the benefits of bottom-up led change? I'm going to tell you a story of a really fantastic way that this has been played out. In 1991, Jim and Monique Sternen worked for Save the Children Fund in Vietnam. Themselves as professionals, they've seen the problems associated with the top-down aid development models, where the project may have brought immediate relief, but usually success and sustainability ended when the funding ended. At that time, 65% of all children under 5 in Vietnam were malnourished. Jim and Monique were charged with improving child nutrition and had 6 months to do this in. So this could have been another case of an external culture coming in and telling the community what they thought was best for them. But Jim and Monique knew better. They already possessed deep knowledge about the causes and interventions to beat child malnutrition, but they also knew that successful and sustainable solution was probably evident within the communities themselves. They took a small team, they travelled to rural areas, they measured and weighed every child in the villages, and something interesting began to emerge. The team found pockets where, despite there being immense poverty, the children were bigger and healthier than average. There were 3 things that the mothers in these communities were doing different than the others. Firstly, they fed their children 4 times a day, more frequently. The second thing, the rice paddies were homes to small fish and shrimp, and they scooped these up and included these in the children's meals. And thirdly, they utilised the tops of the sweet potato plant, the greens, and put them in the children's meals. Frequency of meals, protein, and greens. Rather than coming in with top-down solution, the team looked to the community themselves. They looked at solutions that were already there. But there's a second part to this. Jim and Monique could have just documented this and rolled out the program to all the other communities, but they knew that the success and the sustainability of change would not have been as effective unless they trained mothers to share the techniques with other mothers in the communities. And this is how the initiative spread, and it was successful. In a 2-year period, malnutrition dropped 75%. It stuck. This was a change that was successful and sustainable. Now, it's based on a model called positive deviance, which is central to complexity. Positive deviance also described as looking for bright spots. So deviance is where they deviate away from the normal and the positive outcome that ensues because of that. It takes an active leadership posture that the Sternens modelled to create and facilitate the conditions for change and innovation. But how do we do this? An interesting quote by Start With Why Simon Sinek is that there are only 2 ways to influence human behaviour. You can manipulate it or you can inspire it. Manipulating it is top down. It's where the leader needs to be the cleverest. Inspiring it allows for bottom-up engagement, and that's courageous. Do you want to lead in these change initiatives in the 30%? By engaging your people. So I'm going to present to you the Lead with Complexity framework. So we engage people through empowering them within a culture of trust. Let me unpack it just a little bit further. First of all, what does it take to grow a culture of trust? That's a whole nother keynote. I don't have time to really unpack trust, but we know that trust is something that grows over time and grows in a culture of integrity. Empowering. What do people need to be empowered? Well, they need time to grow together. They need skills for the job, but they also need clarity around the enabling constraints, the framework that they have the freedom to work within. And finally, what do they need from you, the leader, to be engaged? The most important thing, after all, is the leader to find this balance. On the one hand, it's getting out of the way and enabling people to work through a process to be their agents of change. But it also requires, the other side of it is being present and interested and encouraging them to keep going, because the nature of complexity is that it's trial and error. So there will be mistakes and setbacks, but anybody involved in complex change knows that this is such an important part of the whole process. So before we have a chat about those questions, I'm going to leave you just here with this slide, where that's my website. And on that, if you'd like to contact me, there's a contact form that sends me an email, or you can find me via social media. So let's have a look at these questions and let's have a chat about these things. What is something unexpected you're going to take forward from 2020? What are some of the taken for granted assumptions about school that are ripe for change? And when have you experienced the benefits of bottom-up led change? Thanks so much.